Welcome to the Regeneration podcast, one and all. Michael, I've got a question for you.
Wait,
All right.
check it out. Check it out,
I
people.
want to hear. I want to hear. It's mead.
No, it's not.
It's Jason. You can guess.
Wow.
It's
You don't have to
fermented.
guess.
It's fermented. It's fermented.
It is a fermented beverage for
Okay.
adults only.
Like
It's not
Perry.
meat. It's
Perry.
not
And
meat.
as Jason wrote in his recent thing for Front Porch Republic, I feel like it's 5 o'clock inside myself. Yeah. This is ginger beer
Okay.
that I made. Yeah. So anyway,
Is it a fermented thing?
it is a fermented thing, and the thing,
Okay.
like mead, which it looks kind of like mead, it's stronger than it tastes. So you gotta be
Okay,
careful.
gotcha. Yeah,
Be
yeah,
careful,
yeah.
boys and girls. So if they hide it from my
What
kids.
percentage? What percentage would you guess for all the
I
youngsters
think it's
out there?
7 or 7.5,
Okay.
which is not strong for wine, but it's strong for beer.
Yeah, I get it. Farmer talk.
Strong for
We're gonna
pop.
we'll talk farmer things. Michael, you know a lot of poetry. I've memorized so little in my life. A dear mentor who died a couple months ago, this guy, Father Ed, I knew.
Yeah.
He had a freedom unlike anything I'd seen, and I suspect it was from his memory of the complete nonsense poetry of Lewis Carroll, a
Yeah.
lot of Shakespeare. The guy had a prodigious memory. You said a line of Shakespeare, he finished the play. And I try to live life by seeing things that I admire in others, and there's no other way to learn, which is an ideology, and try to do them. But that's one I've never really followed up with. What's been
Right.
your life history with memorization of poetry?
Well, I mean, the thing is, and I think George Steiner, one of my patron saints, talks about this, and he says there's a big difference between memorization and learning by heart. Right? Huge difference. And for me, I mean, I always, even as a kid, I had an ear for language and songs and prayers, and lyrics and clever wordplay, even nursery rhymes. But it really probably didn't really get going with memorization because the shitty Catholic education I received, we didn't memorize we memorized poetry maybe once or twice, but we never learned it by heart. We never learned how to speak poetry. It was like, go home and memorize this. But when I became a Waldorf teacher, then I learned what poetry can do to children in particular by learning to dwell in and to live into a poem. So I got a bunch of them by memory when I haven't been a Waldorf teacher for almost 20 years, for 17 years.
Wow. Yeah.
But for instance, much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many wild I'm losing it. Hold on. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many
Around many islands.
seen.
Around
Many islands have I been, which bards in
Oh.
fealty to Apollo hold. Oft have I been told of one expanse that deep-browed Homer ruled as his domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. Right, and I would teach kids stuff like that, and I taught one class, the 7th grade, I taught them and we learned it by heart and then did it in parts, and it was just beautiful, of Ode to the West Wind by Percy Shelley, which is a long poem, right? We also did the prologue to Henry V. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. I can keep going. And I taught them Jabberwocky, right? And I can't even remember. I taught them, I don't know how many hundreds of poems I taught through my time as a Waldorf teacher. But what you realize when you teach it that way is how transformative it can be for, you can call it the dignity of the human person that's standing in front of you. It changes them. Right? And any kid can do this. It's not like it was just like the kids who were poetic or whatever. It was all the kids who would recite this with me. and they learn to appreciate it. In fact, one of my former students is the rapper Big Sean. And a few years ago, he was here in Detroit.
I don't know.
He's here in Detroit actually right now, I think. But he was here visiting in Detroit, and he was doing something with Dan Gilbert, some kind of youth-oriented thing, because Sean's a really good kid. I mean, he was a good kid when I was his teacher. He's still a pretty good kid. And my friend, who is a cameraman for a Detroit area news station, went down there with his reporter to talk to Sean and stuff. And when they had downtime, between the interview, my friend kept recording. He said, "Hey, Sean, and I understand you know Michael Martin." And he goes, "Michael Martin." And Sean's mom was there with him. And his mom said, "Yeah, I think Sean's love for language came right from Mr. Martin." Well, it just came because it's part of the Waldorf curriculum, and you imbue the children in the arts and the language arts. I mean, the language art of poetry is a big part of it. And and the thing is, what's sad is it's almost non-existent in our current
Non-existent.
educational landscape.
Yep, yep. And the reason
In
that's
fact,
going
it's
to be
tragic.
Jason's gonna go, but I asked you, Michael,
Take it to
too.
the drink, Mike.
Yeah. Ginger beer, chalk one up. Jason has done so many different types of writing. Jason will tell a lot of his own story. And I was thinking of various ways: an essay on Romano Guardini on sailing, some one-liners that I'll never forget. His book, The Culinary Plagiarist. You got to read it to get it. It's really fun. There's a cast of characters. It's got a little Spoon River anthology almost in it. So glad he was put together in a book. It had to be, because these were weekly columns at Front Porch Republic, something that's familiar to all the listeners. And if I understand correctly, Professor Peters, that you and some of the founders saw it, it could use an infusion of energy maybe. And you and maybe Jeff Paulette, maybe Bill Kaufman, all said, maybe there were drinks involved, but that you were going to write weekly for the next year. And I think I was at the conference I hosted where we met face to face. I think you were chewing out somebody, saying like you were the only one who continued with that challenge. Introduce yourself. Weave anything in that you want.
Yeah, well, I'll pick up on that thread first. When we started the FPR website in, I guess it was 2009, there was maybe half a dozen of us, and we all agreed to produce one essay a week. And there were enough of us that we could cover the 7 days of the week and then start over again. Well, people started dropping off like flies. And because it's not easy, cranking out anything that's
Work, yeah.
worth reading.
Feel free to throw people under the bus here, Jason.
Well, yeah, okay. So
we can name them.
My friend Patrick Deneen at Notre Dame,
he bailed completely.
He immediately chose Monday because that would give him the weekend to work on it, and he was the first. I think he was the first one to drop out. But
very funny.
He was the first one to drop out. That's what he gets.
But I just sort of got ornery about it, and I just decided this. If you guys aren't going to carry your water, I'm going to carry everybody's water. So I think I don't remember what it was, but I wrote something for every Wednesday for the first 4 years, maybe something like that. And I can remember composing one of them on a transatlantic flight and landing in Washington, D.C. and typing it out in my hotel room to get it posted, before Wednesday. Yeah. But anyway, a lot of that, I tell the story about this in the intro to the Culinary Plagiarist, but we didn't have any new material. You know how websites are, the site meter has to spin. And so I had made something for dinner with basil and sweet basil and tomatoes. So I just wrote about it, and it was the beginning of a kind of obsession with writing about food and drink, and not necessarily writing recipes, but writing stories. At the time, I was teaching at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. I was there for 25 years before leaving 3 years ago, and it's kind of a fun venture. It's sometimes got in the way of some other writing that I wanted to get done. And anyway, that's how the website.
I find it very rewarding to hear you talk about it seriously, because it's so damn funny. I think even your wife has like 3 personas, but
Yeah.
but that you were able to weave together things and that you worked at it. So even your anecdote about making sure you were going to get the deadline. Everybody, that's not fun necessarily, but that it is the work, the labor shows in the finished product.
No,
There's a
thanks.
lot going on, and yeah, very much. There's a lot going on. Micah, you'd love it. And again, and Jason, while you were doing that, I think maybe it was at the front porch, a convention where we met. And one thing about that, we all met the night before, Jeff Paulette, Mark Mitchell, a bunch of people. And that was at the Avon Inn. And my wife, I dragged her along for the dinner before the conference. And Jason arrived, and somebody was on time, somebody was before, whatever. And I forget who was late. But all of a sudden, my wife elbowed me. Kathy Tumber was there, a student of Christopher Lash, and Russell Urban Fox. But my wife elbowed me. And I think, Jason, you were telling the story of like a little mini mart where they had growlers, like a gallon of beer, like a
Yeah.
microbrewery, and I said, I know that place, and it's near the monastery. The people who go to that store, this is a little detour, they come to the monastery and they might have broken down there, and everybody in that area would change their tire without drawing any attention to themselves. And then they come to the monastery and would complain about like Donald Trump is the only thing evil that ever existed. And I would remind these people from Canada often not to piss on Canada.
Yeah.
But I would tell them that those people you were just thinking were already in heaven, who changed your tires, and you felt so wholesome and real. There's no doubt they voted for Donald Trump,
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the midst of that, in memorization of poetry, you were commuting. You could even tell the background, Jason. You were commuting a long distance to teach at Augustana College, I believe, and you pasted sometimes poems to your dashboard. And again, the product of that shows. The product of that shows.
Yeah, in 2012, we decided that we had to get back to Michigan to look after our parents who were kind of getting up there, and so we just decided to repatriate. We decided to move, and we bought a rundown farm. It kind of looked like a meth lab when I got it, and I went to work on it that summer, just ripping everything out that I could. And I moved my family to Michigan, so I had a 400-mile one-way commute to work when the school year.
One way.
That's why I say this is a wild thing. That's a
So
lot of poetry. Yeah.
I would drive on Mondays, sometimes Tuesday mornings, if depending on my class schedule. Sometimes I would leave at 2 a.m. on Tuesdays to make my 8 o'clock class. And
Damn.
but generally I would commute Monday to Thursday or Tuesday to Thursday and hope I could find places to sleep. And I did that for 9 years, looking for work in Michigan, seeing if something would come up. But I had to pass the time driving, first of all, a 2004 Ford Ranger manual 5-speed pickup truck, and then after that a 2003 manual 5-speed Volvo V70, which still sits in my yard with 320,000 miles on it. But one of the ways to pass the time was to tape poems to my steering wheel and commit them to memory. I did some audio books, but my technology was so far behind. Like the Volvo had a cassette tape player in it, so I had to find a library that would lend cassette tapes. And I can remember listening to 18 hours of lectures on Beethoven on cassette tape.
That's something. Yeah.
Doing a lot of detective fiction, whatever I could get my hands on. But a lot of it was spent composing my pieces for FPR on Wednesdays in my head, and a lot of it was just spent committing to memory whatever poem I had pasted to my steering wheel. You got to do something for 6 hours.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's really wild.
So where in Michigan are you now?
I'm in Ingham County. I'm east of East Lansing, about 10 miles. And I think that puts me, well, you're Grass Lake, right, Michael?
Yeah, he's the other side of East Lansing.
I'm closer to Munich, but not far from you.
Okay, so we're about 45 minutes apart, probably, something like that.
At the most, yeah.
Yeah, that's a connection that needs to be made for the
So
history
what town?
of sanity.
What town is it?
Williamston.
Oh, Williamston's 30 minutes away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right at 52.
52. Yeah. So you know where Stockbridge is.
Yeah.
I'm really close to Stockbridge. I'm
really?
actually to the Stockbridge than to Grass Lake.
So you're much closer than I thought you were.
Yeah.
What can you say? It's almost like the way you described it. I knew I was going to ask you about the memorization of poetry, but the way you described it in your car, because you did that for a long time, and they were long journeys. I want to say, having like worked at a monastery, that can be quite a transformation. Was it as deep as it could have been? Like how much poetry did you end up memorizing?
I did mostly lyrical poetry, so short pieces, but every now and again I say, like, I can't remember perfectly the to be or not to be speech. So that would go on the
Okay, yeah.
and I'd freshen that up. Or I'm stuck on line 18 of the first paragraph of Paradise Lost. So that would go back onto the steering wheel
Wow.
to tweak that. And then
It's like self-discipline I don't have.
part of the problem is if you don't recite stuff to yourself, you'll lose it.
Yeah, it's true.
So when I'm in my garden in the mornings weeding, I use that time to kind of brush up on the poems that I've got committed to memory. And if I find myself messing them up, then I'll go look them up and try to
Tell us about your love of literature. How did it start? Give some of your bio, because this is all very real now,
Yeah, when I went to college, I knew I wanted to write. I only cared about writing well. That's about all I cared about. But I thought I was going to be a journalist.
And now you're a professor at Hillsdale College.
Now I'm a professor at Hillsdale. Yeah, I wanted to be a sports writer when I was a kid. I've spent rather more time with sports than maybe I should have.
But your book includes some sports writing, mostly about Michigan State basketball.
Yeah, I'm an unreconstructed sports nut.
You and me both, my friend.
I can't shake the habit. But anyway, my sophomore year, I ran, as an old colleague of mine used to say, I ran afoul of the metaphysical poets, and specifically the Holy Sonnets of John Donne, and I was kind of limed at that point. I was bitten. So I kind of gave up the whole business of journalism and got serious about the study of literature, and worked as hard as I could as an undergraduate. Just decided that I didn't know if I would ever be able to land a job as a professor, because
Where did you do your undergraduate?
I did my undergraduate at Calvin College.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah,
Michigan.
Cool. Very disciplined, right? Eugene Genovese was there.
Yeah,
wild.
So I ended up going to graduate school just because I wanted to keep studying. Everybody told me that I was never going to get a job because there were no jobs, and it was true then, and it's true now. But
it's truer now. Yeah.
Yeah, somehow it happened, and I've really been fortunate. But I just I can't believe how lucky I am to be able to read good books all semester long with young people, and
That's nice.
and see how they often will treat a work of literature like a Christmas present, just full of wonder.
I know.
As they open it and see what's inside it.
Well, hey, I have to interject here.
Good.
So in the last 4 years, I've given talks, one at Hillsdale and one in Hillsdale, to Hillsdale people. So probably a lot of my friends are a lot of your friends. And did you know Hillsdale College is the only college that I know of that subscribes to Jesus the Imagination?
Is that right?
That is correct.
But that is now so elite, right? We're not talking Harvard elite, but those, like, my wife and I have been talking about a tiny little Catholic school near us, and we sent our kids there for the early years, but we never cared what they did. Like Bill Kaufman, whose kids, he just kept them home more than they were. We did the same thing. We had one kid who just didn't go to school on Wednesdays. He didn't like it. But yeah. I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
I don't know.
The elite.
Your kid.
Oh yeah. So
elite
we sent him to the school because it was small. Because it was Catholic, but I would say being Catholic, I didn't send him there because it was Catholic. It ended up having an elite status. We were not. I made so little money. We had 3 kids in this tiny house, but it was the sons of doctors and lawyers mostly. And our kids were there, and it wasn't the money, but it was the fact that all their parents gave some little iota of care for the kids. I said, I can buy into that. I can pay tuition for that. That it was small. Arts were still featured because the principal, that was going to be fading. But there's so few families like that out there anymore. So right. I'm not a social justice guy. What do you guys say about that?
Well, all I was going to say is, so this it was back in January, I think it was, that I gave an address at this conference at somebody's house in Hillsdale. Maybe you know them. You know the Kuipers?
I don't know. No.
You don't know them?
No.
Catherine Kuipers, she's in the education department, I think. Um, and they had, it wasn't just professors and people like me. Well, I don't know if I would call myself a professor, but um, there were also students giving presentations. And I went, so it was like a Friday, Saturday thing. So the Friday evening I went there, and some of the students were giving presentations. And the first thing I thought, I have got to bring my daughter Zelly here.
Yeah.
Because my daughter Zelly is now 20 and she hasn't gone to college. She's super smart, but and she would be the ideal liberal arts student, but she doesn't want to go to some normal college where they teach you to hate literature.
Yeah.
And I said, you got to come and meet these kids. This is your tribe. And she came with me on Saturday, and they were her tribe. And I was impressive because, and maybe Jason can confirm this from his previous teaching experience, that I've been teaching college for 25 years now or whatever. And guess what? It's not teaching college. It's insane. It's I even 20 years ago, when I was first as an adjunct teaching, and I'd come home and I would teach as a Waldorf teacher during the day, and then I'd teach 1 or 2 classes at night at local Catholic liberal arts college. Then I'd go home and I'd tell my wife, get the kids in the basement.
Yeah.
Civilization is collapsing. It's over.
Yeah.
But those kids in Hillsdale gave me hope.
What metaphor do we use? Keeping the lights on for civilization? What is the forthcoming civilization? What does the pedagogy say about the forthcoming civilization? Are any of those interesting?
You can say that you're keeping barley wine in the cellar for such a time as there are people who can appreciate it.
It's cool. Yep. Yeah, I like that. That kind of freed something up in me. It's cool. And it's a nice place. Like who wouldn't love teaching? That's going to be a perennial love. Teachers, it's as timeless as time ever is, right? The light on somebody's face when they're interested in these deep things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a blessing. The students are remarkable. My colleagues are remarkable. To go back to a remark Michael made, nobody is in the business of literature to help people hate literature. We all love it. We're not trying to use it as a political club to
I know
do something else. We're trying to understand.
At Hillsdale, right? Just for our listeners, yeah.
So,
it's rare. It's rare.
How long have you been there?
I just finished my 3rd year.
Okay, because right before you got there, Dwight Lindley, you know him.
Yeah.
Are you in the English department?
Yeah.
So Dwight invited me. This was 2020, I think, to give a lecture on the metaphysical poets in Yaka, Burma, but it was the day before they sent everybody home because of COVID.
It's my daughter's graduating class.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Very symbolic, these things that happen.
And the thing is,
COVID.
and I'm telling people, and actually afterwards, I was invited over for an afterglow. I was going to run home because you just run home from those things because I got so much to do on my farm. I said, oh, okay, I'll stick around. And we went to actually the Kuiper's house, and we talked, and they all wanted to talk about fairies. And I'm like, okay, I'm with the right people. And it totally changed my was probably a poisoned perspective about Hillsdale. And I was like, no, because people would tell me, oh, it's like the Reagan youth. No, it's not. It's not even close to that. Yeah. This is the most open-minded group of people I've ever met in my whole life in academia.
Yeah,
it gave me hope for the
How many other places are there like that?
I would say
is Grove City one?
I would say half a dozen, maybe.
Okay.
Not many.
PHC.
Patrick Henry College. Okay.
Maybe Thomas More, Wyoming Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't know much about University of Dallas. That might be on the list.
Okay.
But it's
short list.
Most of those are overtly Catholic, and Hillsdale's not overtly Catholic. Is that the understanding?
That's right. I mean, it's kind of amusing. I come in there as an Eastern Orthodox and kind of watch the mostly friendly dispute between the Protestants and the Catholics. And had a student just graduated this year. He's crazy about a bunch of Catholic girls, and they're crazy about him, but he's crazy about about being the one guy who doesn't convert.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm always making jokes about him, how he's going to have to go off in some dark
Now,
corner where nobody
hey,
sees
I was
him
just
do it.
telling Mike this beforehand. Is there a colleague of yours at Hillsdale who was a deacon in the Orthodox
Yeah,
Church?
that's my department chair. Yeah.
Is it? Because
Jackson.
get this. So a couple days ago, I was telling Mike this before we got on, is somebody I know through X or Twitter. I didn't realize she lived 20 miles away. So she's probably over by you.
Mhm.
Or actually she's farther west from us, but she was saying that her deacon has this great website. So I checked out her deacon's website. It's your department chair.
Yeah.
What's the area of research? What's the area of interest for the deacon?
He's a medievalist and does Anglo-Saxon, but he also does the online courses on Hebrew literature.
Oh, very cool.
Smart guy, a lot of fun. There are 3 Orthodox faculty members at Hillsdale. All of us are in English.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Let's bring in something that some of our best shows come when we start with something of a hard stop, weave the back into a higher synthesis, weave them all together towards the end. But it's the name Owen Barfield. Jason knows I'm always kind of like picking around him a little bit. Your PhD was on Owen Barfield. You can describe that a little bit.
Was it?
Yeah.
You told me we had a lot in common.
Again, a little bit of a backup to what led you to the interest. Where did you discover Owen Barfield? When you did your thesis, was it out of love? Did you mine a niche? Where are you? Do you still think, where is his deepest relevance? The last issue to promote Front Porch Republics, do sell that, the journal, which featured John Lukash. Kind of weaves into this. John Lukash had the highest regard for Owen Barfield. But Lukash, again, this will be of interest to Michael and I. Michael knows much more about Rudolf Steiner than I do. But, when people read Barfield, the Barfield-Steiner connection, that's all of interest to people.
Sure.
Talk about whatever interests you, Jason.
The way I got interested in Barfield is kind of like, it's a good story, kind of like the way I got interested in Wendell Berry. A lot of people have asked me, so how did you get into Wendell Berry? I said, by copyright infringement. What the hell are you talking about? What happened is a friend of mine sent me a photocopy of an essay, and that was the beginning of it. With Barfield, I had seen poetic diction in footnotes all over the place.
Okay.
And finally one day I just decided, I better read this book. And I think I don't know if I read it in the year I took off between undergrad and grad school, or if it was in grad school that I read it. But I read poetic diction. I thought, okay, here's a rare mind, and I'm going to have to know more about this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back in time to History of English Words, jumped ahead to Saving the Appearances. And then it turns out that there was a guy in my grad program who had been friends with Barfield, and they had been colleagues at Missouri for a short time. So I approached him with the idea of doing a dissertation under him about Barfield. Now, he was a modernist, and he was also seminary trained, but he was a pretty good Coleridgean, and he was a little bit skeptical at first. I don't know if he distrusted my intentions on this thing, but I said, here's what I want to do. He says, yeah, okay, that's a doable project. And so I got through coursework, got through comps, and I wrote a close to a 400-page dissertation pretty much in 9 months, most of it over the summer. But I had it worked out up here for the most part. And I think that the thing that really struck me about Barfield is he was, to my mind, offering the most serious critique of modern science out there. And by that I mean the kind of tyranny of modern science and its inability to know its own mind, know its own metaphysical assumptions. And he was a part of that living romantic revolt against Cartesianism that we see, especially in Coleridge, but also in Wordsworth and some of the other Romantic poets, Blake, obviously. And so I just got really fired up about it. And the great thing was I had a dissertation topic that I never lost interest in. I've had friends and colleagues who have written dissertations and got bored out of their minds, after 10 pages, but
Yeah.
had to grind it out. I was just electrified by this. And so I just I took a narrow focus. I said I want to do Barfield as the best inheritor of Coleridge and as the guy who best understood what the project of the Oxford English Dictionary would mean for our understanding of the evolution of consciousness. And so I cranked this thing out. I worked pretty much 12 hours, probably 15 hours a day all summer long to get this thing done. Because I've been hired, I had a job, so I had to get it done. I wasn't going to take it with me. But I still think, I'll make this the last remark for now. I still think that Barfield is maybe, he said Coleridge matters to us for, for one or two, three, maybe really important insights. And as far as Barfield was concerned, it was Coleridge's dissatisfaction with Cartesian description of things. And I think that true is Barfield's most important contribution to Western thought.
Couldn't agree more, Michael.
Well, yeah, I mean, same. I mean, this is Mike was right. You got to talk to this guy. That I was surprised when we talked to Mark Vernon. Remember Mike?
I liked him.
Who wrote a book on Coleridge? I said, and I asked him if he'd ever read any Steiner, and he hadn't. I said,
a lot of George Lukács or John Lukács. I'm sorry, the same thing, kind of. I'm not saying there's a moral valence to it.
And recently, so I was reading what Coleridge thought, which some people call what Barfield thought Coleridge thought, and I read Ancestral.
I love them both, though. I
like the book, but
so
the thing is, I came to Coleridge from Steiner. I mean, I was a Waldorf teacher about biodynamic farm. I know a lot of Steiner, right? And so I'm reading on Ancestral Voice, and I knew what it was. It was a popularization of Steiner's ideas, whereas Coleridge is the Coleridge book is not. And I would say, and I'm not an expert at Barfield, but
a popularization, but a book in its own right, for sure.
The good one.
A Barfield's good one. Saving the Appearances.
Saving the Appearances, I think, is the most original book by Barfield, and I think it's an amazing book. And I think where he gets that critique of science is directly from Steiner, which Steiner called what he was doing spiritual science. And I was just looking at something. I was looking for something yesterday. I was thought, let me see what Steiner says about this. He didn't say anything about what I was looking for, but just about any place you turn in Steiner's works, you're going to find a critique of materialistic science. And that, I mean, I think right now we are living in the nadir of what materialistic science will bring us to. Where it's the dark
it can't
ages.
Get much worse, though.
It really is the dark ages.
It's so
trust
bad.
the science. Well, now science is a religion. What the fuck? And I think it's like you mentioned earlier. My dissertation was on the metaphysical poets, and they and the Romantics, and even Barfield's book Romanticism Comes of Age is exactly what he's talking about is Rudolf Steiner. Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I see what he's getting at, because I see the thread from the German Romantics into, through Goethe, through Novalis to Steiner.
That's the genealogy handed on by Waldorf, for sure.
And trying to reimagine what a human science would look like. Right. And you see this, and part of what I wrote about, because I was writing about metaphysical poets, was Henry Vaughan, and who was deeply immersed in Hermeticism, and his brother Thomas Vaughan, who was a Anglican priest as well as an alchemist. And Henry, he was, besides being a poet, Henry was actually a physician. That was his job. But you see the way they thought about science was a much more Christian way to think about science than what science became in their century. I mean, within a generation of their deaths, it became, the Baconian, Cartesian, bifurcation of spirit and matter. And what I love about Steiner and Barfield and few people out there in the world is they're negating that
Wendell
false
Berry.
dichotomy,
Mhm.
and try and I, and I don't know. I mean, I get kind of depressed about it sometimes, but they're telling you what could be,
Hmm.
but what is keeps asserting its power over us, and it's not doesn't make me happy. But I think, to me, that inspires me in my work as a farmer and working with nature and working with poetry, is that kind of sensibility that is Romanticism coming of age, that both of those guys were heading toward. That gives me that I live for. I mean, just that's what I live for.
I should
And I
say this.
do battle with all these people on Twitter and stuff because they're not they're not awake. They're not, it's like Blake, right? Awake, O sleeper.
Yeah.
They're not awake.
If
And
the if
we're
the
going deeper and deeper into sleep.
if it was gate, what was Blake said? If the gates of perception were cleansed, all would appear as it is, infinite.
Yeah.
Except everything appears finite because the gates of
Yes.
perception are not cleansed. There's a,
We're
by the way,
put
there's a
on
book
this earth
out.
a little space so that we might learn to bear the beams of love. The same idea.
Yeah,
We just can't. We have to acclimatize ourselves to reality.
where was it Blake said? An atom is a thing that doesn't exist. I love saying that because it's not exactly what he didn't mean it exactly. What he meant
Yeah.
was it doesn't exist apart from our perception of it.
Yeah.
And its relation to other things.
And Heisenberg later affirmed it.
That's right. Yeah. There's a book by the way, there's a book out now called What Barfield Thought. And Whiffenstock published it. I haven't read it yet. It's
Who wrote it? I heard about this.
it's co-authored, and I don't know the guys who wrote it.
Okay.
But
I did hear about it.
My thesis advisor, his name was Roger Miners, great guy. For one of the reasons he was a great guy is we could talk about basketball if we had to instead of everything else. But he blurbed what Coleridge thought when it came out in '71, and he said I'm rarely blown away by a book, but this book blows me away.
It's
in
wild.
71.
It's
So it's
wild.
been up for a while. Okay.
Wow.
71, 73, something like that. Yeah.
So powerful. What Coleridge thought for the readers. Yeah. Interesting, Jason. Yeah. So say more. You and Barfield. Where does it stand? Is it still seminal to your thinking? Are Barry and Barfield kind of pole stars for you? What influences, like vis-a-vis your Orthodox faith and so forth?
Yeah, I think Barfield's a little tough to read when it comes down to Christianity. I mean, he was C of E communicant, but it's sometimes a little tough to make sense of the things that he says in that cryptic way of it, especially in Staving the Appearances. Mm-hmm. But I would say that Barfield, on the one hand, gives me a way through philosophy to understand what Barry gives me a way through the practicality of farming to understand. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, I hope this isn't too tedious, but when you read Homer, when you read the Iliad, for example, so much of nature is deified. Rivers are gods, the breeze is a god, rumor is a god, rage is a god. And this is something Barfield told me. Modern readers are tempted to think this is merely metaphor or merely simile. And it certainly is both of those. But Barfield's point was what you hear in the Homeric poems is the residue of the capacity of humans to feel nature as a living being, mm-hmm. Not as mere causation, but as living being. And you know, I have moments where a breeze crosses my face, and I feel like I'm in the Iliad. I feel like I'm out home because I have that experience of the world. And on the other hand, like before I came in here for this, I was out moving my lambs from one paddock to another, and it's hard for me to understand. It's hard for me to believe that I could have the joy that I have in life without daily contact with livestock.
Same here.
Just to remember that there's a world beyond my head. I love the world beyond my head.
Oh yeah, and it's I tell people when they say to me, you know, because the academic environment, as much as I can appreciate it, would be toxic without that daily contact with the things of this world.
I can sense
You know,
that.
we have lambs too, you know, and
I can say the same thing working for the Most Holy Roman Catholic Church at HQ. Doesn't make sense unless you communicate with the real.
It doesn't. It doesn't make
it doesn't hold together. It does not hold together.
And it's an antidote to modernity. You know, because it is and I have the same feeling that you have. So right now I have some bottle lambs I'm feeding, and I go in there in the morning, and I'm sitting on the sill of the barn feeding these two crazy lambs, and watching the wind go over the pasture, and you think, and it's so easy you could take it for granted, but you can't take it for granted because it's a revelation. It really is a revelation. Right? It's a disclosure.
You know, a question that interests me for both of you, I was thinking about it before we came on. The name of our podcast, as listeners know, is the Regeneration Podcast. How would each of you, and I was thinking for myself, and they're not deep, what would you describe as degeneration? You know, why would we say we're undergoing degeneration? I was thinking, you know, at a movement, if we're using Barfield for a template of what he would call final participation, and for our listeners, when they hear me sing the praises of John Cowper, Poes, I think he's the best author writing. The guy chilled and made his bed in a final participation. He just like told us what it looks like. We don't have to look farther and farther. And I don't think the canon is closed. Not that I would necessarily include Powys, but and I think that, you know, this great centralization is so evil. You know, we always talk about John Milbank loves the EU. Last week I was saying, you know, echoing Leopold Kohr. Beyond the EU, it's not just getting back to France and England, it's getting back to Burgundy, it's getting back to Dijon, you know, and so when people think progress, there's a false final participation of like centralization, CBDCs, you know, where it's left brainism, algorithms. We fight this all the time. But how would you guys define what makes your blood boil with degeneration? You know, it's when I see it manifested with the technocracy, I always call it to myself, you know, in my mind, we call it false circle too. But really, if we look at original participation, alienation, and final participation, I would just call it false. You know, it's something bad offering people just a, and as we know with evil, evil is not 180 degrees from the good. It's the worst is the corruption of the best. Well, what's degeneration to you, Jason, when you look around? And what might constitute, what interests you as a guest for regeneration? Where would you put some energy? Go ahead.
Yeah, I you know, I have to work on this sometimes. I ask myself, what is the worser invention, the automobile or the cell phone? And it kind of depends on, maybe it depends on my mood, ETOH in the bloodstream. I don't know, but I think that one of the real problems that many of us face, and especially a lot of young people face, is they have so much between them and the world that is the given world. So many buffers. Money is one of those, by the way. I think it's this kind of falsifier of reality. But I hit upon this several years ago. I was thinking about the desire for the control of nature. You know, Bacon promises that we'll be lords and masters of nature. And then you know, while I was thinking about this, I was reminded by a line by Blake: "The bounded is loathed by its possessor." So here on the one hand, you've got the Baconian dream of possessing and controlling And here you've got Blake who's saying, yeah, if you're going to possess something, if you're going to control it, then you will loathe it. The bounded is loathed by his possessor. I think this gives us, this is a pretty good description of the contemporary relationship to the world that is.
And the elite, for however people define it, it gives you a sense for how it could work. They just loathe. People can loathe things.
And the things that they hate, I absolutely love. As Thoreau once put it, what my neighbors believe is good, I believe in my soul to be bad.
Guilty. Yeah.
Any things you see, and it almost sounds like a nearing the end, but it shouldn't be a nearing the end of the conversation question. Does anything get your interest when you're talking at Hillsdale? I'm sure you're seeing students who say, Professor Peters, what do we do? What do we do? What do you tell a young person who sees maybe the way you're describing so eloquently the goings on, the degeneration? What would you say to inspire hope? I always say when something's dying, something's being born. When we look, we can see the lineaments. It seems to involve maybe the underworld. Listeners know I really think this idea that the only way out is through.
Mm-hmm.
Something with darkness and light. We talk about the divine feminine. We think there's some connection between the divine feminine and a final participation that really starts to bring together darkness and light, our relationship with nature. What gets you excited, Jason?
Yeah, I like to see kids who are beginning to understand that there's value in opting out of all the things that are on offer to them, like the capacity to say no to the next shiny thing. If every glittering lure that goes by you go after and take a bite out of, then you're the bass that regrets the seduction. But more and more I'm seeing kids, it's not easy for them, but more and more I'm seeing the kids who they're intrigued by older ways of living. They're intrigued by a greater proximity to the seasons, to the daily rhythms of the natural world.
Right.
And they're getting that sometimes through the study of poetry, and they're getting it sometimes through the snarky comments I make in class about how nobody knows what nature is. Nobody's ever been outdoors. Do you know what water is? Do you know what a lake is? Have you ever seen one before? But I think you're right. I think, Michael, you're right. The way out is the way through. I don't think there's any Gnostic escape here. I think like the formula in the New Testament is not escape from, but pilgrimage through.
Amen.
And that's what we do. We push through this. We're going to get some help along the way. Nature, we're going to get some help from nature because she's going to run out of things. We treat her like this ATM, and there's an endless supply of 20s inside it, and the 20s are going to run out. And then you've got to revert to the real wealth of the world, and got to know something about it.
Yeah,
it's helpful.
I think actually connected to that, I think Mike asked this question about degeneration and the title Regeneration, which actually we took the title from the first poem in Henry Vaughan's Salix Scintillans, Regeneration. And I'll read you the first stanza. It's a long poem, but this is it. A ward and still in bonds, one day I stole abroad. It was high spring, and all the way primrosed and hung with shade. Yet was it frost within, and surly winds blasted my infant buds, and sin like clouds eclipsed my mind. And what's wonderful about Henry Vaughan, and he's such a weird poet for his time, because unlike the other metaphysicals or anybody, even Shakespeare, he was so plugged into nature and the rhythms of nature and to scripture. So most of his poems come with an epigraph from the gospel or from someplace in the Bible. But the images of nature that so imbue his poetry are so foreign to everything else of his time, which later people will call him a proto-romantic. But his proto-romanticism is deeply, you could even call it a part of the kind of Welsh Celtic Christianity that he grew up with, right? That was a rural Christianity, which
Welsh Christianity interests me greatly.
To me, that will be the salvation of the church. is the church, and I think East and West, more West than East, but certainly both, has been estranged from nature for a long time.
Mhm.
And I would say almost all the problems we see right now in the world stem from that estrangement from nature that the church, I mean, I shouldn't say the church, I mean, the church leadership took long ago and started to distance itself from that. And now, is that because Christianity is primarily an urban religion, even though there are certainly rural aspects of it? And that's why Mike and I've talked so many times about the Celtic Church, which was not an urban-based Christianity. There were no cities to speak of. Um, when I look at it, I mean, I think that Barfield is a part of that. Steiner is just definitely looking that direction. So is Barfield, that a Christianity reconnected to the seasons and to the cosmos
Mhm.
is it's the only way forward.
I've heard it said that the Bible has to undergo, or what's the word here? It's got to be the metaphors have to be replaced by metaphors that contemporary readers can understand. They don't get the Lord is my shepherd. They don't know what a shepherd is. What the hell's a
Yeah.
shepherd? And
Mhm.
that's bass backwards. What has to happen is the readers have to be able to get those
Agreed.
metaphors.
Yeah.
They've got to be reintroduced to. And this is, we go
Remember
on.
Jeff Bilbro's column on sheep at the college on the college green? He tried to it's great. He tried to reintroduce sheep and they
Yeah,
couldn't fathom. They
yeah,
lost almost the ability to think of it. It just happened
yeah,
so fast that every time we lose a farmer, to acquire this stuff. Go
yeah.
ahead, Jason. Yeah.
By the way, I had a guy try to animal house me once. He had a sheep delivered, tried to have a sheep delivered to campus to be put in my office, but turns, turns out we were on break, so it didn't work.
That's great.
But you know, you kind of go on and on about this if we wanted to, but one of the, I think, great contributions of Barfield is that he makes a distinction between primary and secondary metaphors. And this goes along with his idea of how meaning is essentially given. It's deposited into consciousness. This is a totally post-structuralist move. But I guess you could also say that we are the heirs of a whole metaphorical system of understanding the world that we don't get anymore because we've replaced it with metaphors of the machine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In the machine age. And it's not as if the machine doesn't provide the imagination with interesting metaphors. It just means that you can call the heart a pump for only so long, and at a certain point it ceases to be a machine because it never was a machine in the first place.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
That thing, it's in Kristen Lavransdatter. It's obviously in Goethe. The
yeah,
heart pump thing is in my house. It's a
Steiner.
big point of contention.
yeah,
The heart is a pump. Oh, it was big for Ivan Illich, of course. Huge,
yeah,
seminal.
yeah.
Uh,
So we don't need new metaphors. We need a capacity to understand the ones that were given to us.
that's
Yeah.
really well said. In,
Yeah.
in addition, go ahead, Michael. Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking, what's the name of that book? I probably have it right here.
Sometimes I can guess what he's picking out.
I don't know where it is. But I can't see it. I mean, I'm not going to run. But
We've
there's this
all
book.
been in that position before.
No, I don't.
In the
Well,
middle
I
of
don't
a
know where shit
conversation.
is in my office, but
Yeah, none of us probably.
but but there was a book by Ellen something about, and she draws heavily on Barfield, but it's about the Old Testament and agrarian.
Ellen Davis.
Ellen Davis, that's it. What's the name of the book?
What's the thesis?
Well, exactly what Jason just said.
Yeah. Yep.
Is the
Okay.
thesis.
I think the word agrarian is in the title of it, but uh, she reminds us that you cannot read the Old Testament without understanding the absolute devotion to place.
Yeah, couldn't be more true.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
she's
well,
still
in the
teaching.
and that the God of the Old Testament is a God of fertility.
Yeah.
And we live in an age that is hostile to fertility. We
to say
really
the
do.
least.
It's bizarre. As we talked about that a couple weeks ago with the
Right.
Kohan, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
She said, as Jamie said, you don't have any kinds of animals having a meeting and saying, how can we get less of us? Right?
Yeah.
You go, Jamie. Yeah. But it's bizarre.
Didn't
And humans
Japan
do
just
this all
enact
the time.
another
I'll never
massive thing?
forget.
Yeah. It's
Now, I don't
wild.
know if this happened to you, Jason or Mike, but this is at least 20 years ago, probably 25, in the faculty room at the Waldorf School where I taught. And I walked in between classes, or maybe I wasn't teaching that period, and a couple of teachers were in there complaining about overpopulation.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, we just have too many people. I'm like, well, who's going to volunteer to get off?
Isn't there a new thing going
Anybody? Any
nationally about
volunteers?
birth control?
I'll
Just
do the bit.
unlimited birth
I'll be
control.
the hero.
Unlimited birth
I'll
control.
make room. Just like the World Economic Forum, they
Yeah.
complain about overpopulation all the time. They never volunteer to make room.
Our betters are currently working in Congress to make just all forms of birth control like available for frizzle. It's just
And
all
here
you
I
get is
am
birth
having
control, birth
9
control.
kids. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Jason
I have
talked about
had
that. Yeah.
actually, I faced people who said, how can you do that to the environment?
Yeah. Let's weave in another aspect of
My kids
Barfield
are
too,
great
though.
for the environment and for the economy.
Because the seasons, fertility is a great hinge point, and I want to keep connection with nature alive. It's totally seminal to going forward. But something we talk about a lot on the podcast, and I think about all the time lately. I'm not in a huge Bonhoeffer craze, but this idea of taking all the jargon, salvation, righteousness, all this jargon, and bringing it down to earth. For example, calling, repentance, ultimate honesty. There's the seasons we have to tie in with again. But as Barfield would say, the increasing incarnation of the logos, right, which is changing language. So I read a great quote by it's called The Sacred Wand. It must have shown up on Facebook or something because we did 2 episodes on masculinity. And a really progressive lady, I forget her name, Sophie Strand or something. But
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But she had some great lines about the word involvement. And I'm fascinated with the word conversation because we need to reconnect young people. We need to start restitching the universe back together. So the festival year, but what do you think about this incarnation? I think about it all the time. The abbot of the monastery who spoke, remember in Geneseo, Jason? Father
Yeah.
George de Souza. Yeah. I mean, he's a visionary when you talk to him. He gets it. He gets our connection to matter. He was born in Qatar. He's of Indian descent. But he says nobody believes in the incarnation. Nobody believes in the incarnation. Like the thing is
Yeah.
supposed to matter becomes more and more important. The divine
Right.
feminine comes into that. Speak to Barfield on that. Speak for yourself, Jason, on the incarnation. Maybe vis-a-vis the Orthodox faith.
Yeah, one of my better teachers in this was Flannery O'Connor,
Mhm.
who so she reminds us that the world was good enough for a dying God. It was good enough for God to die for, partly because that God had taken on human flesh, that had, in a sense, sanctified the material enterprise of humans
Right.
by taking on matter himself. And you can get at that through the doctrine of the incarnation. You can get at that through the high doctrine of creation. But one of the things I learned from O'Connor is that, and
That
she
was
got
fascinating what you just said, by the way. A high doctrine of creation. We don't talk about
Right.
that on this.
no, there's no such thing as creation. It's,
No.
Okay, yeah.
blind forces.
Mhm.
But she learned this from a priest named Father Lynch. I'm blanking on his first name, but he said that what we achieve the spiritual through, not by skipping through nature or bulldozing through it, by the athletic penetration of nature. And O'Connor's expression for this was the physical world contains the spiritual world, and you don't get at it except by the penetration of it. It's one of those images that was so interesting to some of the early hymn writers, that the finite, the Virgin Mary, could contain the infinite.
Yeah.
That the large thing could be on the inside of the small thing. And to me, O'Connor got me to thinking once again about the necessity not of living in contempt of nature, but by the full embrace of it, by the full penetration of it. Apart from which, I think to go back to Blake, we have this sense of loathing that which we possess, and we're never meant to possess in the first place.
Hmm.
I
Blake,
think
oh, yeah.
there's also a great insight. I mean, and this sociology is all about this, and I've quoted it I don't know how many times in my books, but from Bulgakov, talking about the earth itself becoming the holy grail when the blood of Christ touches it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you probably experience this as I do. So my experience as a farmer is to be in communion with that blood that's working through the earth. It's so, and that's absolutely in contradistinction to so many, especially evangelicals, but I think it infects a number of Catholics and Orthodox as well, with this bullshit notion that the earth is not our real home.
Right.
Some people don't know there's an option between strip mining and ecofeminism, or Jain Buddhism, and that because they've the whole Homo
Put that on a
ludens.
license plate, Mike. I'm telling you right now.
But it's
Bumper
true,
sticker
right?
material right there.
Yeah, but I mean that's the whole thing. Bill Bryson does it so well in his travel memoir about the Appalachian Trail, right? That the American consciousness, when we get into nature, it has to be so far away from all things being civilized, right?
Yeah.
And so the Appalachian Trail studiously avoids contact as much as it can with civilization, whereas, let's use the first Middle Ages as a prototype of maybe a final participation. By a bridge, you can heighten the beauty of a creek by putting a wonderful bridge over it and things like that. That's, I think front porch, that's the same image. These tertium quid places, as educators, we got to die on that battlefield of keeping the commons alive as an option. We need to start breathing air into these third spaces, and again, I think even the word third spaces, when I see it being handled by some Europeans, they've intellectualized the shit out of it. The third spaces is something you talk about in your cubicles as you've taken the tube, and you're never going to touch have 10 secret names for a tree. Jason.
Yeah, there's this, you mentioned the Romano Guardini piece that I wrote several years ago on saying, I think he's really onto something. He's saying, in a sense, there's no such thing as raw nature, or we weren't made to live in raw nature. We were made to live in art, and things that are artfully done are sometimes they're cities, sometimes they're front porches, sometimes there are other ways, but we never live in raw nature. We live in nature infused by mind, constantly infused by mind. And this is one of the points that Wendell Berry makes. He says there's no sense in talking about nature apart from the human presence in it. The question is, what is the human presence going to do, and how is it going to rearrange things? Is it going to do so in accord with the way nature works, or across it, against that grain? So, for example, he makes the distinction between an agrarian and industrial economy, and he said both of them take, make, and use. But the difference is in what happens in the last stage. The agrarian economy takes, makes, uses, and returns. It returns as fertility. The industrial takes, makes, uses, and discards, throws away, or sends back into the earth as toxin or as garbage. Nevertheless, there's no sense in talking about raw nature apart from the human presence. What we have to get our minds around is what the human presence is going to do, and how and what kind of difference we are going to be making. And that can be done artfully, and that can be done. It can be done on a suburban plan or on some other plan.
Was it Barry who came up with the correspondence between strut mining in Kentucky and the SAT, or did that just evolve somewhere else? That both take a precious resource that's local, strip it out of a local culture, and just leave waste in its place. So somebody, Bill Coffin was the first one who taught me in a great essay called "The Old College Why." I think it's in that compilation. Why do we go to college? That the idea is to go far. To grow up is to go far.
Right.
not to be acclimatized to a place, to try and leave the place better. But this kind of equivalence between the SAT and strip mining is quite interesting.
Yeah, Barry made that connection when
Okay.
he calls the university a strip mining operation.
Yeah, right, right.
It just takes the goods from one place and uses them up somewhere else.
Yep.
And leaves the place they came from ruined.
Hmm.
Imagine taking all the football talent from all the small towns and making one really good football team out of them. Then all the towns are left with the guys who are president of the chess club playing football.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You can't
Mhm.
you can't sustain a local community with all the talent stripped out of it.
If you were starting a new school system, would you go kind of classical education? How would you start conceiving? Right now, I think in our diocese, it's not too long till the Catholic school system, as we might know it from childhood or we've experienced, it's dying. Um, People are going to be scrambling to find a way. I think, we have a daughter probably at my house right now. All of our kids are going to be here for a baby shower. It'll be the first grandchild coming. But she teaches at a school and she sees the collapses on the way. When a shop teacher retires, that's never going to be in the curriculum again. There's no money. She's have to drop French this year, and they're just cutting like mad dog. Um, how would you begin if all of a sudden where you're living in rural Michigan and it doesn't have to be tax funded? How would you start educating? We got to begin a mother's love for a child is to begin the whole thing. What do you think about when you're think about those things?
Yeah, there's a pretty good movement afoot for grade schools, junior highs, and high schools that is pretty much classical.
Mhm.
You see some people who are trying to combine this with trades, which I think is a great idea. Let's have small classical schools. Let's have kids learning grammar by learning foreign language, learning Latin principally. Let's have them reading great books, but let's have them learning skills as well. Not treating their education as if it's an elevator ride up out of the trouble of taking care of yourself.
Well, it's a prolonged college entrance, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's how it's treated.
Yeah,
It's invented it's created in the image of the people who run it.
there's a kid in my parish who's going off to a school next year before he starts college, and it's kind of like the model, I guess, would be nurses who do rotation. They do OB, they do cardiac, they do psych. But these kids, they do plumbing, they do electrical, they do masonry. And, it's a great idea just to get it into the minds of young people. You're not above work.
Mhm.
You're made for work.
Mhm.
Learn how to do it. So if it were my job,
Especially boys.
I avoided elementary and junior high and high school on purpose. But if it were my job to start rebuilding these things, I would insist on great books. I would insist on ancient languages. I would insist on hands-on work as
Which
well.
is
What do you
in a
think,
way
Michael? Yeah, just answer the same
that's
question.
what a Waldorf school was supposed to be.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
They've gotten awfully woke in the meantime, but well, they have. I mean, they just have. But if when I wrote what's the name of that book, Transfiguration, the chapter on education, pointing to the hedge schools in Ireland, right, which was a kind of a subversive, we'll teach these kids, and it was a combination of kind of a classical approach of great books and classical languages, but also practical arts as well. But what I've been, kind of thinking or hammering on about a lot is, and it's not true anymore after the schools got so woke in the last 4 or 5 years. But before that, it was education, K-12 education in this country, and whether it's parochial or wherever, almost is a very intellectual trip, right? It's a prolonged college entrance, but the thing is, that wouldn't necessarily be so necessary 100 years ago, because all those kids had practical experience because they mostly grew up on farms or
Right.
But now that practical stuff is even more necessary than it used to be because kids are escaped from it. In fact, it reminds me, my two youngest boys who are 13 and 15 are starting a blacksmithing class this weekend. They have like a workshop for 2.5 days on blacksmithing.
I just had two friends who went to the Steubenville conference on Memorial Day weekend. They're kind of overseen by, is it St. Joseph's the Worker College? It's a prototype program of the industrial arts with college down there. And it's new polity, really. It was new polity on technology. And they were giving me feedback. And you mentioned Wyoming Catholic College. I had never heard of the play Heroes of the Fourth Turning, which came up last week. I've been thinking about that. What do you think of St. Joseph the Worker? Kind of paying tuition. I worry that we're gonna have they can accept 30 people. You have all these homeschooling families waiting to get in there, and they don't know. The Ivan Illich in me is like, it's always free. It's out there, folks. Look outside, right? Education's there. Why do I care if the guy who's a good mechanic is Catholic or not? I really do not care, but they're going to look for internships. They're like, my son has to intern with a good Catholic schoolmaker. I don't get it. I just don't. Well, Michael, this is the way it is.
Well,
And they're
remember I
charging a lot
talked
of
to
money
that
for it.
guy. There was somebody I was looking for someone for us to talk to interview about distributism.
Yeah.
And I found this guy on the internet and I'm talking to him and he goes, well, we really can't have distributism until everybody goes to the Latin mass. I'm like, fucking bullshit.
Yeah. Leon Boy did not care if his butcher
Say the
was
rosary
Catholic.
and go to the Latin mass and
Yeah.
then we'll get everybody to do that. And then we can have distributism. Okay, that's not going to work.
Michael loves distributists.
I
No, you
well,
like distributism. You hate distributists. Jason, what do you think? And again, I want to say the people, Mark Barnes, these guys are brilliant. We need to have them on. Anything anybody's trying is worthwhile. Let a thousand flowers bloom. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there's always a grave danger of some of these places eventually becoming cake eater schools. You got people whom your founders intend to reach and whom your successors price out of the system because education gets too expensive.
Well said.
My son-in-law is trying to get one of these classical trade school combo things going and started in Hillsdale. I think is a good thing. I mean, I hope it's a good thing. It's just that I'm too little of a visionary to take that kind of risk.
I'm obsessed with scarcity. I guess I am just a creature of Ivan Illich. This notion that we got to do everything to get back to the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, which doesn't mean there's not schools. Right. But I'm so worried, the whole notion that hospitals made health become like a scarce commodity. I think that's the thing we're fighting in our time, to me. Michael? Yeah.
Well, no, I was just thinking with the classical academy thing. There is actually, and Jason probably knows this, there's a Russian Orthodox church, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes away from here that is trying to start a classical academy, like maybe just grade school.
I'm all for them
to start. And but you see what's kind of what I like about it, it's kind of grassroots thing, and what they want, and it's kind of, in a way, it's a hedge school because they don't want their kids educated into the bullshit that's available to them in, and I would say public and private schools.
For the most part,
that's just it's thin. It's not nourishing and it's not Christian, even if it's at a Christian school. I know that was my experience through, the 800 years of a Catholic education I went through. It was dreadful. It had nothing to do. It wasn't actually, it wasn't, I was telling somebody this the other day. It wasn't until I walked into a Waldorf school right before I became a teacher that I realized that it was healing the shitty Catholic education I had, because now I finally saw what a Catholic education should have been like. In fact, a friend of mine was a priest, an Eastern Catholic priest, who came to visit one day when I was a Waldorf teacher, and he said, "This is what all Catholic schools should be like."
There's a huge overlap with Maria Montessori in this
stuff.
And
plus, in a Catholic school, in a Waldorf school, all the kindergartens have a painting of the Madonna. because that's the image. This is the image of early childhood education.
I didn't know that. Waldorf, to this day, all classrooms have the Madonna.
Yes.
That's pretty forward thinking.
Very often it's the
I
Sistine
like
Madonna.
Waldorf more right now than I did 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, and the thing is, even
This stuff isn't
my
rocket
wife was
science.
just talking about the other day with the kids, because the kids, even though we homeschool, we say the Waldorf verses with them in the morning, and they're just beautiful prayers. And the thing is, what Steiner said, that the idea is, you need to be, as a teacher, you need to be able to bring the child to reverence.
Mhm.
That's not a phony, you better be reverent or you're going to have to stay after class. You just
said
have to
prayer. I
find
just found this
organic-
book today,
Yeah,
Adrian
and
Spare's
poetry,
Prayers. So funny.
but poetry does the same thing, right? Poetry does bring a child to reverence.
Yeah.
Just like, you have to, and that's one of the things that's really emphasized in a Waldorf school, at least used to be, and I can't speak for how it is now, is that bringing the children to reverence. And that's why
You, Michael, regarding Waldorf, yeah.
Well, that's why there's such an
Reverence is one of
emphasis on
these
the Christian
words, like
festival.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer would have a field day with reverence, right? I'm looking for a reverend church. Father Dwight Longnecker has this. I can't say this stuff with a straight face. You go online, it's like a website where you can go to Rochester, New York, and find where the reverent masses are. And all, you don't even need to have ever
Check
gone to
out
a Waldorf.
reverentmasses.com.
Yeah, if you were locked up in a black box, you didn't even hear of Waldorf, you would be able to see this the meaning of reverence is just confused by this website. But Michael said, the face of students when they heard the same story on the Feast of St. Francis of Assisi every year, and they saw on the face of students reverence. That's probably the best
Yeah,
definition.
that
Best
happens.
definition. Larry
It
Chapp wants
comes
to
from
say
the
the
story.
universal call to holiness, so, and he was great. But I have to ask him, like, what do you mean by holiness? All these things are like, they haven't been incarnated yet. Jason?
Well,
Yeah. Don't forget that there's someone should say a good word for irreverence too. But
Yeah.
I'm good at that one.
yeah, you can't be serious without irony, and you can't be ironic without being serious, and
Yeah.
or reverent without irreverence. Hey, maybe what we need is a sign out in front of the church.
That's more important. That's so important. Reverence and
Reverence,
irreverence.
8 o'clock.
Final
Service,
participation. Yeah.
10 o'clock irreverent service.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's final participation. We
Well,
should get serious.
I used to tell students in teacher
We should
training.
get really serious about that. Combining humor
what
and
happened?
serious.
So get this, I had these students, I was their master teacher, and I had them in teacher training, and and they would go do their student teaching, and I'd have to go watch. And invariably, because they would be very pious while they were doing it. And it's like, okay, time out. Okay. Yes, teaching is a holy undertaking, okay? But it's not a holy office. So you can be human. You can tell jokes, right? Right?
Humor is so important to final participation.
You can't be human, and coming to reverence, coming to irreverence, but you have to learn how to, we don't live in a world that allows people to be human. I mean, look at the whole trans thing, right?
If you follow Powys, you would say final participation has humor, because he would say all humor, I find this profound, I've mentioned it before, all good humor is based on the non-recognition of the equality of all souls. Does that make sense? All good humor is based on the non-recognition of the equality of all souls. So great humor just brings down the mighty, right? And so that's final participation. We need it. This Gerald Hurd, who the Abbot Gerard and I like so much, he knew that, again, in Hinduism was leading towards, before the Mongol invasion or the Islamic invasion, was leading towards humor beyond tragedy. There's going to be something divine feminine. It's going to have matter, materialism. I think we can start piecing this stuff together. Jason, what's interesting you right now? We're nearing the end of our time together. What are you reading? What are the questions that interest you? Tell people about your works and things like that. Where do you find your passion lately?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm trying to finish 2 books right now. I've got one more. I think I got one more in me on Barry, and I think I'm almost done with it.
Wow.
The question is, he and I are kind of friends, and it's kind of a shitty thing to do to your friend to write a book about him while he's still. Wow. He turns 90 this summer in August.
Oh, wow.
But the other one is, I've got a manuscript with a tentative title, Dispatches from Dumbass Acres. And
I've seen some of those essays too, I'm sure.
Yeah, it describes the story of, coming home, repatriating, and then getting this place up and running. And so I'm going to go through that again this summer and just see if there's something there worth working on. If there's not, I'll just trash it. But those are the two main writing projects of the summer. I've got a couple of minor things to get done. Otherwise, I've got a list of books that like I do every summer and never get through half of them. I've never read Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping, so I made a promise to a colleague that I would read that.
My wife has read them, I haven't.
Yeah,
what else you got on?
I read her nonfiction. I'm going to read the Briggs translation. I'm planning to read the Briggs translation of War and Peace this summer. Because I've got a colleague who says he just loves that.
I'm on a big Boris Pasternak, just Dr. Strangelove gig. Alexander Schmemann wrote an essay called The Eucharist of Boris
Dr.
Pasternak.
Zhivago, Dr. Strangelove.
And it's wild that he wrote the book, The Eucharist, and then he meets you out. He's way out in final participation. Schmemann at the end of his life is just hanging there saying, it's all there in Dr. Zhivago. It's wild. Merton intuited the same thing at the end of his life.
Did he really?
Yeah. He had this correspondence. He was most proud of it with Boris Pasternak. And saw everything in Dr. Zhivago. So I'm just familiarizing myself with the story. What else is on your summer reading? And then Michael.
Yeah, well, I'm doing some peripheral reading for the next 2 issues of Local Culture. I gotta stay ahead of those things, and I've got 3.
Can you reveal the topics or no?
So our fall conference is on civility and its discontents.
Who's the keynoter?
Ross Dalbert.
Wow.
And so I think I'm going to do an issue along those lines. Civility, civic virtue, civic education, civitas, something like that for the fall to kind of correspond with the conference. And then
also the election.
Yeah, also the election, but I'm trying to do this as an exercise in ignoring the election. All right, this journal is called Local Culture. We're going to keep this local and keep the two keep Krusty the Clown and Bozo the Clown out of it. And then in the spring, I want to do an issue on work. And I'm trying to imagine the sorts of essays that would appear in that.
Michael Martin be thinking of your essay for work, maybe? Martin would have an interesting. Yeah, say more.
Well, I have to write the intro piece for everyone, so I don't.
Yeah.
I try not to get any more involved other than soliciting essays on different topics.
Yeah.
I was talking to a guy yesterday. Well, I was talking to, I guess it was Jeff Blatt a couple of days ago. I said, why don't you write the essay on why college girls are not interested in boys who don't know how to work?
Wow.
Good essay.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I got.
The thing is, too many college girls are.
Yeah, I know.
This is the same thing like the Commons. It came up last week. They see, Jason Peters goes to Augustana College. Where'd you go to undergrad? St. Olaf's.
Calvin.
Oh, to Calvin, right. Yeah. You're the son of an accountant. You're a business major. They know you're going to get your dad's business. They're turned off by that. And then they end up going for the guy you just described because they miss the poet. They don't know there's somebody out there who would have 3 jobs if necessary to keep bread on the table, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a confusing time for young people, to say the least.
It is. Wow.
And
how about a whole episode on that sometime down the road? I mean, that's maybe the most interesting thing to me.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So many young women, they don't want husbands, they want pet dogs. I don't get that.
They're selling out. If college women, 25 years in campus ministry, if I had to summarize all the advice I would say, I'd have to take one gender, women, and say, don't settle.
Yeah.
And I've told my daughters, don't settle.
Yeah.
Don't settle.
Right.
And they're settling. And that, among some social circles, involvement, discussion that are kind of forming around the Diocese of Rochester. I'd like to think I have a part in it. They talk about, that a girl could go to Christendom College and a guy, and then they get married and they're going to have the sex and they're going to have babies. But a person who's very close to me will go visit them. She knows them growing up. This is metaphorical, but true. And then a week in one case, well, I won't mention the details, but the guy is chewing Nicorette. He's got a pipe. He's doing cosplay of Tolkien, and the wife is saying, what did I get into? What did I get into? I married a teenager. I married a teenager, right? So we call it like Catholic cul-de-sac cosplay.
Oh.
It's a problem. We need to have you on and figure this stuff out. And Michael, yeah. Well, so Jason Peters, we want to direct people to the Culinary Plagiarist. We wanted to direct people to Front Porch Republic. We want to direct people to consider a subscription to Local Culture. Anything else we can promote, Dr. Peters?
We've got the Front Porch Republic manifesto called Localism in the Mass Age that Mark Mitchell and I co-edited. But yeah, we're pretty close to 1,000 subscribers to Local Culture. I'd like to get that over 1,000.
Wow.
If we can.
You know who could do his job to do that? Maybe me. I'm just lazy. I'm just lazy.
It's
just lazy. I'm just lazy.
I got to say though, Wendell Berry says somewhere that he's willing to be part of any movement that promises to be poor. And we don't have to make that promise because we just are. We dream about having a shoestring budget.
Yeah. With the conference, I was close to that,
Yeah, I edit the journal and I edit the imprint. It's all, it's all gratis. It's just one of the 4 jobs that I do, and I only get paid for one of them.
But you're reversing the culture where people will bite each other in the streets, as I say. You're doing your little part to restitch something back together.
It's fun work, and it's a great crowd, as you know, from being.
I do.
It's a great crowd, and
we got to twist Bill Kaufman's arm to come on sometime. He's a Luddite.
I think he's got an aversion maybe to living on forever in a video. But yeah, he's one of the greats.
Yeah.
He's a national treasure.
He's a national treasure. I just stalked him one day. He was writing for Chronicles magazine, and I realized the guy lived in Batavia. Yeah, it's just great. Dr. Jason Peters, glad to see you're enjoying Hillsdale. Can say it from the bottom of my heart. Looking forward to the next time. Let's frame it right now. Let's name the episode. What would you say about young people? What would we?
One of the things they got to do is if they want to run things, they got to have kids.
What would we call the episode? Yeah. What would we call the episode?
We'll call it Traffic Was Terrible. Because when you say traffic was terrible, you're always talking about other people. You're never talking about yourself.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Traffic
We're going to call it that. Traffic was terrible. Jason Peters on the 4th turning or something.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you guys plan to do this on D-Day on purpose, but it was fun. You say that.
A lot of fun.
Right.
Again, thank you, Dr. Jason Peters. And thank you for listening to the Regeneration podcast.
Thanks, guys.